Welcome to the Rise and Wander podcast, where we'll explore adventure, spirituality, and empowerment through the outdoors and beyond. Join me, Carla Amador, as we focus on topics around the mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional benefits derived through the outdoors. You'll also hear inspiring stories, get educated, and more. Let's get started. This season's podcast is sponsored by Oboz Footwear, based out of Bozeman, Montana. I proudly wear my Oboz footwear for hiking, traveling, and more. They have many styles and options to choose from for all your winter and hiking needs. Looking for hiking boots, recovery shoes, or fast and light hikers? Look no further and check them out at obozfootwear.com. Welcome to episode 2 of season 2 of the Rise and Wander podcast. Today, I'm going to be discussing what you need to consider once you've decided you want to hike Mount Kilimanjaro. So there's a lot of things and logistics and questions that you're going to have. So my hope is that by the end of this episode, you have thought about some things, and this will help you to be better prepared for when you do book your trip and move forward with this beautiful, amazing goal that you've set for yourself. So when you first decide that you're going to go ahead and move forward with taking this trip to Kilimanjaro, you're probably going to first want to decide what dates you want to climb the peak in. You can climb it all seasons, but there's better times to climb it. And a lot of guiding companies actually don't even take people up to guide them during what they would call their off season. So if you want to know what the climbing season for them is, it's December to early March and June to October. And if I were you, I would just go online and really look at each month. And there's going to be considerations. We went in mid-February and we ended up having pretty intense weather, as I mentioned in the last episode. And I was hoping we'd have good weather, and we ended up having quite a bit of rain, and we had snow on some days. So it really was towards the end of the season. So really do your due diligence. As long as you're prepared and you have all of the gear that I'm going to talk about, even if you have weather come in, you should be able to hopefully still succeed on your attempt to hike this peak. So once you've chosen your dates, the next thing you'll probably want to do is, or even as you're choosing your dates, you might want to start looking at guiding companies and who you want to use, because you cannot hike Mount Kilimanjaro without a guide or a guiding company at least. There's a whole permitting system, and you'll want to make sure that you book someone as soon as you confirm that you want to do this. And as you're looking at guides, you'll want to look at people who are paying their porters a fair wage, who are paying their guides a fair wage, and have good reviews. And so for us, we worked with Adventure Tripper. They do that due diligence on our behalf, and they vouch for the companies that they refer to their clients. We were really happy with our guiding company, and I can tell you they were amazing. Everyone had nothing but positive things to say with the guides and the staff and the porters. And as I mentioned in the last episode, we really are their livelihood. And I had so many conversations on the mountain with the guides where they were like, I'm an accountant here in my country, but I can't make enough money. I make more money guiding. And these are people that have families and kids. That's another thing. Like with our guiding company, they had weight limits that they had on their guides. And I don't know, I can't speak for other guides, but I've heard that there are times where people carry more than they're supposed to. So I felt good knowing that we had vouched for the guiding company, and they had a really good system where some guides only do certain things per day, and then other porters do certain jobs. They each had their own jobs. So now you want to look into your guiding company. You'll probably do your price shopping, and prices are really going to depend on many different factors. So I'm not going to quote what we had our trip advertised at, because every season changes, permit fees change. So you can get a general idea of costs and all of that online when you're doing your research. In addition, we gave our community extra support through 52 hikes. We had monthly phone calls where we did training conversations, we answered questions, and all of that. Looking into that will help you to decide how much you want to spend. And obviously, on top of that, you need to get yourself to Tanzania. We flew into the Kilimanjaro International Airport, JRO. There are two airports there that you can potentially look into flying into, but also speak to your guiding company because they may say, we want you to fly into this airport. So, anyhow, we'll talk a little bit more about those details. I'm going to go back and forth between my notes here just to make sure that I cover everything that really is important. So once you have your dates and your guide, now you're going to go ahead and book your trip, book your flights. Hopefully, your package includes a hotel night the night before the trek and a night when you're dropped off after your trek. Our package included all of that. So pretty much no one had to stress out about, oh, I have to book my own hotels. It was all included in the price. Now, I do know some people in our group came in a couple days earlier because they wanted to acclimatize, and they ended up either booking separate hotels or just booked with the hotel that we were at a couple extra nights. And those are some perks of going with a package deal where you don't have to do all of that. But if you need to, it's pretty straightforward. What's going to matter is where your guide wants to pick you up from. They'll tell you which area they recommend that you stay in. Whoever you end up booking, they're going to really help you in the planning of your trip if you do need to book those extra hotels and all of that. Going back to other considerations, as you're thinking about this huge life journey, I would say that something that was really awesome and I think is worth considering is while you're in Africa, why not go on safari? Yeah, it was really wonderful. My group ended up going on safari as well, and it was one of the highlights of not only life, but being in Africa and going to see these incredible animals. It felt like something out of a Disney movie, like The Lion King. I remember half the time I'd just be replaying that song in my head. And so, as you're planning everything, like even setting your budget to include some safari days, I know that we did have the ability to do a shorter safari. We did a 3-day one. But if you're like shorter on time or funds, there are like 1-day options that you can look into. And in addition to that, the day we came in, we actually did a local tourism day where they took us around and we looked at a local market and we went to this welcome center with African art and music. And it was just really cool. It was a cultural center there. Okay, so let's get into some frequently asked questions. Things that you're going to want to think about when you're booking is what's included in the package fee that you're paying for with a guide. Make sure that it includes things like the national park permits, the camping fees. Does it include rescue service? Those are things you might want to consider having extra insurance in case of an emergency or anything like that. What meals are included? What are the guide and porter wages? Is this going to include the transfers between the hotel and the airport? We actually stayed in the town of Arusha, and that's probably where you will stay. So it was just something that I had forgotten. It's been so long. But anyhow, does it include the transfer from Arusha to the mountain gates? What gear do they include? So for ours, it included the mattresses. And when we were there, a couple of people opted for double mattresses, and that was awesome for them. And in a way, I'm like, man, I should have done that. It would have been a lot more comfortable, but it's okay. It all worked out. Do they include a toilet? Mount Kilimanjaro actually has some public toilets, pit toilets, but I will say that having your own private one that's cleaned up and handled every day was really nice. Do they include wash basins and treated drinking water? All of those questions. Usually, with a guide, they are going to include the food and water for the most part, from at least the ones I saw. Other things you're going to want to talk about or think about is what things are excluded from the costs that you are getting a quote on. Usually you'll see that your flights are not included, rental gear that they don't include, you'll need to pay for things. If let's say you're traveling and you don't want to bring certain things with you, you'll need to look into that. So also asking what gear do they include? Ours included the tent. So that was nice. Usually tips are excluded for the guides, porters, and the staff. So make sure to account for that. That's another really important line on your budget is setting aside tip money. And usually meals and drinks prior to the trip are excluded, but you should always double check that. Any additional travel insurance, your visa, which we'll talk about, any additional medical insurance, all of those things would be excluded most likely. So just make sure you do your due diligence so that as you're putting down your costs, estimates, and your budget, you know what extra items you need to think about. As I mentioned in the last episode of the podcast, we chose the Mosheme route, and you're going to need to know what your itinerary looks like hiking wise so that as you are planning for your trek, you know how to train. Okay. That's really going to have a big impact on your training schedule as you're getting yourself in shape for this trek. And so I know that for hours, the longest day, first off, summit day was intense. We did 3 miles, 4,000 feet of elevation gain, and then we did 8 miles of 9,000. That was a lot. We also had a day where we did 7 miles and we did 3,600 feet in that day. So that's really going to impact your training schedule. So be aware of that. Find out how many days and how many miles you're doing. What's the elevation gain? Those things are going to be really important as you're training. You're definitely going to want to find out what happens in case of an emergency. As I mentioned in the first episode of the season, that there is a true possibility of altitude sickness. I mean, you're up at 19,000 feet and it is possible that you could get altitude sickness, and knowing like what help do you get, what's included, do they bring oxygen with them, all of that good stuff, do they have satellite phones, and just being sure that your guide is set up to handle those kinds of emergencies is really important. I wanted to take a moment to thank this season's Rise and Wander podcast sponsor, REI. REI is the outdoor gear retailer of the 52 Hike Challenge. I've been a member since I started my 52 hikes in 2012, and they've helped outfit me for all things hiking and outdoors since then. Becoming a member has many perks like 10% back annually on eligible purchases, a satisfaction guarantee, which gives you up to a year to return any purchases you aren't satisfied with, free shipping in the US, and so much more. Please visit them at rei.com. Join me for a year of hiking in 2025 with the 52 Hike Challenge. Commit to your personal journey outdoors alongside a supportive community and make 2025 your year of hiking. Take your family, friends, furry pets on an adventure they'll always cherish. Plus, you'll gain the physical, mental, spiritual, and emotional benefits derived through nature and hiking. Learn more and sign up at www.52hikechallenge.com. And see you on the trails. Other things to consider is going to be the weather. That's greatly going to impact the gear. And so, as you're planning, again, as I mentioned in the beginning, knowing and thinking about when you want to climb is really important so that you can start thinking ahead as to what you're going to bring, what the weather might potentially be, and all of that. Other things to consider is that there will not be Wi-Fi up there. I believe in the beginning when we got to the gate entrance, they did have Wi-Fi at the gate. Also, like planning for your phone being charged on the trek. I brought a battery pack for the trip, and that's how I was able to, and I kept my phone on low battery mode and all of that. Asking the guide how big the team will help you to also plan your budgeting. Things like, do they want to be paid in local currency? I know that our guides and porters wanted their tips in American dollars if possible. Knowing their preferences is really going to be helpful. And then, yeah, in Tanzania, there was a lot of places that took credit cards, but be mindful that carrying money is always advisable as well. So, as of this trip that I went on this year, the tips looked something like 200 to 250 US dollars per climber for the crew. On top of that, I gave additional tips for my group because I felt very thankful and I wanted to do that. So just be mindful of that. And obviously, it's really up to you what you want to tip. And it's also going to be dependent on what trek you're on. This was a specific suggested tip for the trip I was on. You're going to fly into the Kilimanjaro International Airport, most likely. Double check that. Find out again if you're going to be being picked up or do you need to get yourself to your hotel. That's going to be really important. Also, talking about your trip, you're going to need a visa. I have to tell you this little story. They said you can get the visa upon arrival. And I was going to do that initially. And then I was like, you know what? I think I'm just going to get it beforehand. And I did. I went on and I applied and I got everything in order. And then I get to the airport and they were having some issue and they were like, hey, where's your visa? And I gave them the paperwork that I received. And they were like, we can't get this visa to work. And pretty much they almost didn't let us on. And I was like, they said that you can get the visa upon arrival. And they were like, our procedure and policy is that we need the visa information before you board the aircraft. And I was like, I cannot miss this trip. I'm the leader, facilitator. And thankfully, after almost an hour, made an exemption, but they were pretty adamant that they warned us and that they were not liable if we were unable to make the next connecting flight because of this updated information that they had on their end. So just be mindful that it's always best to be safe rather than have an issue come up. And even though some of our people in our group did get to the airport and get their visa there, I still think it's best to plan ahead. Plus, it's always easier to do it online. So why not? Travel insurance, yes, it's always a good idea to get travel insurance. World Nomads is the company that we used and I recommend. And you do need to make sure that your passport is valid for at least 6 months before arriving. So make sure to check your passport and those kinds of situations that may arise with your passport. Make sure to check on policies on that. Other things you may want to think about when you're on your trek, if you're going to do a safari, is if you can leave your extra gear somewhere. Usually, the guiding company was also happy to keep it for you. So, those are extra things to know. And as I mentioned, the only other thing I would add is to really consider you're going to be going halfway across the world. So, why not go on a safari? I think it was an amazing experience. And I'm so glad that more than half the group ended up doing a safari. And it was just such an unreal, memorable experience. It is a costly endeavor, but it's also a bucket list, lifelong adventure. Start saving your money, set your goal, and make it happen. It's such an amazing experience. Africa is incredible. Really hopeful that I'll get to visit Africa again. We might even do another trip to Kilimanjaro. So, anyhow, I hope this episode was helpful to you, and I look forward to continuing the conversation in our next episode. We're going to be talking about training and what considerations you will want to have in mind as you're getting ready for this adventure. And I really appreciate you being here, listening to this podcast. Make sure to subscribe, share it with a friend, and leave us a review. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next episode.